This short video is about assessing the moisture level of your compost system. Ideally, moisture is kept between 40% and 65%. This will feel something like a damp sponge after you've squeezed out all the water. Let's take a look at two different piles.
I'm Natasha Duarte with the Composting Association of Vermont, and this is my colleague Athena Lee Bradley. She's with Wyndham Solid Waste Management District, and we're going to be looking at different compost piles and diagnosing what might be wrong with them. And so we'll be talking a little bit about the problems we see and how to fix it. All right, so I'm going to bring the shovelful that I took out of this pile here right up close to the camera. You can see, first of all, this is like a whole corn cob husk that's probably too big. It's going to take a lot longer to break down, and it's got this hard knob on the bottom. But if you look at what I pulled out of the pile, there's some citrus, which is fine. That's a pretty small piece, some eggshells and leaves. But when you squeeze it, we talk about the squeeze test a lot for community composting. When you squeeze it, it's clearly too wet. You can see water there pouring over my thumb. Clumps together. All the leaves are sort of matting. So when you squeeze, you really shouldn't have water dripping out of your pile. You want just a little bit of glimmer between your gloved fingers. We're going to be looking at a pile that's too dry later, so you'll be able to see the difference. So what you would do is add some of that dry carbon and really aerate it. So turn it so you can get the drier carbon mixed thoroughly with all of this wet material. One of the issues with a pile that's too wet is the microorganisms are oxygen loving, right? So this is an aerobic process, which means it needs oxygen to function. And so the microbes actually drown. So you're actually killing off all of the beneficial decomposers that are doing the hard work in your compost pile. This pile is a too dry pile. So one thing that can happen is that you can have a dry pile with little pockets of anaerobic wetness sort of mixed in between the dry.
And what happens when it's too dry, it's just the opposite of being drowned. The microorganisms don't have enough moisture, and so they just start dying off.
You can also do the same squeeze test. You can see if I take a handful of this dry material, I can squeeze it. There's certainly no water. It also doesn't hold together at all. Yep. You can see this visually, but if you want a tactile test, this is a good way to do it.
This table is a good guide to refer to when you're doing the squeeze test until you get a feel for it for yourself. If water flows freely from your hand, your compost is too wet. You need to thoroughly integrate some dry carbon material and keep checking on your system. If a few drops of water show between your fingers, the system is at the high side of the optimal range. Keep an eye on it, especially if you add a large volume of wet food scraps. If your fingers glisten a little bit with moisture, or the compost stays in a ball shape after you squeeze it, this is right in the middle of the optimal moisture range. If a ball forms when you squeeze it, but the compost easily breaks apart, this is probably on the lower end of the optimal range, so keep an eye on it and don't forget to water your system if you're having dry weather. If you squeeze your compost and no ball forms at all, and then when you drop the compost, a dry dust remains on your hand, your system is too dry. Decomposition will slow or stop altogether if you don't add water, food scraps, or other wet material. If you have any questions, feel free to contact one of us and be sure to refer to the other tip sheets on the NERC website. Happy composting!